how Gen Z became the poorest generation. What's this? Is it because they're stupid?
Almost everywhere online, you'll notice videos, articles, and news clips talking about Gen Z becoming poorer. Oftentimes, you'll see people say it's because Gen Z are lazy, entitled, and not having enough children or families. Population collapse looming over the horizon as many warn about what's to come when there just aren't enough children to sustain the coming future. Is this
Well, we won't need children, we'll have robots.
Just because Generation Z supposedly wastes all their money on morning Starbucks and owning an iPhone? Well, it doesn't take long to realize that this is far from the truth, and is merely a band-aid type reasoning over the massive gaping wound causing Generation Z to become so much poorer than other generations.
Jesus.
So are Generation Z, an entire generation of people around the West, just really that lazy if they physically can't work more than 12 hours a day to sustain a life? How is it that in the past, you could really just get a job through an ad in the local paper on only a high school diploma, and by living off a regular normal salary, you could have a big house, a stay-at-home wife, with 3 children?
That's the thing that I feel like most people are mad about, is the fact that they can look at these old movies and these old shows, and it can be like some dumb husband who works on an assembly line, and he has a house, 2 cars, and a boat.
Why does it appear that to live a normal life now is just so out of reach for most in Generation Z? And what effect will this have on the future? Well, to better understand this whole situation, we need to go back in time to compare the life of a regular person to someone today. In the past, for other generations, higher education was a sure way of moving upwards in the social structure. However, today, this is just becoming more and more of a financial black hole.
How many of you guys know somebody who is basically like they have a bunch of student aid debt, and like they can't get out from under it? Because I know a lot of people that are like that. Especially like, I mean, now not as many, right? Because like a lot of my friends have gotten jobs and shit like that, and they've been able to pay it off. But for a long time, that was the case.
Which has doubled the amount that students will have to pay in the last 20 years. If we count that with inflation, the tuition for public colleges in the US has jumped by more than 213% compared to the 1980s. Baby boomers would pay about $10,000 converted with inflation to 2018, but Generation Z now at the very minimum is paying $25,910.
Oh my
more
god.
Often well into the 6-figure range, as this number also excludes rentals, administration fees, stationery, and food, which is why there's such crippling debt all over America for students right now. And even if you do get the best grades and scholarships possible, many Generation Z students are still required to take on these huge predatory loans. Loans that stay with you even if you go bankrupt.
Students are brought up and people are brought up to think that you need to go to college, and you're in an institution that for 12 years institutionalizes you into believing that you need to go to college.
Even when they make it outside of university, they now have a huge burden of loans hanging over them, restricting all of their financial decisions. And all of this for really what? Unless your degree is specifically needed for your line of work, a degree doesn't seem like a direct pathway to a good job anymore. It doesn't even guarantee entry-level jobs as Gen Z.
A good example was like, didn't Extra Emily say she had like a college loans of like $170,000? That's a lot of money.
Entered the workplace, it was a culture shock to be expected to do jobs that didn't suit their idea of what working would be. As now most companies—
It's like, imagine if she didn't become a streamer, right?
Need work experience, and if you're fresh out of college, this is almost impossible. I mean, despite abundant claims of job openings, finding work has become harder than ever. The news will always tell you that companies today are struggling to fill positions, and yet countless people in Generation Z specifically can never seem to find a job, even if they send out dozens or even hundreds of applications.
You don't have the experience, you don't understand the industry well, and so they're not going to hire you. They're pulling the ladder up more and more, and so it's harder to even get in.
Single interview. Decades ago, this was never the case. Even during job shortages, getting hired was much simpler. Advice like dressing well and filling out your CV was often just enough. Persistence led to success. But today, this approach is much harder. One major shift is the rising bar for entry. Before 2000, a college degree almost guaranteed you a good job. For other generations in the past, this was just a given. It was why you went to university. But for the first time ever, this isn't the case for Generation Z. Now, a degree is the bare minimum for them. Employers now focus on the top few % of candidates, while most roles require years of experience even for entry-level jobs. The internet has also transformed hiring. In the past, companies recruited through local events, word of mouth, or physical job postings, limiting competition and making hiring even more personal. Today, a single online job listing can attract thousands of applicants instantly. People send out applications en masse, creating a numbers-driven process that favors quantity over quality. And then in recent years, automation only made it that much harder. Application tracking systems, otherwise known as ATS, is used by nearly all major companies to filter candidates based on criteria like keywords, experience, or location. Originally designed for simpler tasks, these systems now reject applicants automatically for failing to match specific parameters. Many CVs are just discarded without ever being reviewed by a human. This tedious process leaves many feeling demoralized, especially when rejection emails just become normal, and yet at the same time you see on social media all of these rich millionaires living it up in places like Dubai. AI is making these systems that much more sophisticated, allowing companies to further automate hiring while removing human judgment. While job hunting has always been challenging, the rise of automation heightened competition, and unrealistic standards have made it far more dehumanizing. Before, you were given an opportunity to have an interview face-to-face to at least give the employer a good impression. This is now only merited if you're selected for an interview at all.
I remember I went to an interview and I couldn't figure out how to open the door to leave the interview room. And I drove home and I was thinking about how embarrassing that was.
There's even systems now that only pick up on certain words which might keep your application in the run. And there's the problem with advertising jobs. While they already have an applicant in mind, they still have to advertise. Or perhaps they fill the position but don't take the advert down. And if by chance you do get selected, you'll then be subjected to a questionnaire designed to gauge your submission to authority. As companies now want to hire people who will not challenge their expectations and restrictions.
That's right.
Wages have flatlined for the past 20 years. Of late, the average hourly earnings of employees in 2024 is the same as that of 1978. And that was during a bad economic down period. And so while living prices, real estate, just your normal expenses have shot through the roof, the income you receive really hasn't changed at all. This means there's far more restrictions in place that make it that much harder to live independently. And that's why today we're seeing more and more people in Generation Z living with their parents for as long as they can. In the year 2023, nearly 45% of American adults who are 18 to 29 years old are living with their parents.
I remember growing up, it was seen as weird that I lived with my mom and I didn't live on my own.
Cost of food on average was about $4,500 per year per person between the years 2000 and 2010 for millennials. But Gen Z is now looking at 22% more at about $5,500 per year per person. So with all these financial problems set in place,
that's nuts.
With that crippling Generation
not today.
Z,
we're not balling anymore.
Them in starting a life for themselves, pushing back the time that you get married and start a family of your own, just because you're still not even able to live independently at this point, as it's simply not affordable.
They feel like they don't want to have kids because they can't financially support them. I talk to like friends of mine, especially. One of the big concerns is economic anxiety.
So onto this rising rental cost that we've all seen. It's clear to almost everyone now that housing affordability has dramatically changed over the years. In the 1970s, the average cost was about $23,000 for a home, which today, taking into account inflation, would be about $150,000. But today, homes now average at about $400,000.
I'd want to see median more than average, because you're going to have like $30 million homes that are going to be like increasing this number. I feel like this is probably a little bit not representative, but I'm sure it's high.
This is why baby boomers had almost no problems buying a house.
And keep in mind, $420,000 for perspective and context. I grew up in a working class neighborhood. House across the street from me and like one over, it was on sale. $455,000. And I remember the woman that used to live there was so poor growing up that she would have to walk to and from the bus stop. She didn't even have her own car. Now it's almost $500,000 to buy that house.
Few years of having a job, they would easily be able to afford a home. It was extremely affordable to what they earned, living costs were reasonable, and homes were not really in demand. But of course, for people today, it's the exact opposite situation. Now, the general rule of thumb has always been that you could eventually afford a house if the monthly payments were 30% of your monthly income. However, today, this isn't really that possible. Most end up with 50%, leaving little money left to even survive, making this a seller's market, eliminating most normal people's options of buying a home until they're at least 50 years old, leaving them paying rental costs for someone else or never having anything to show for it. Landlords—
To be fair, there is, like, if you want to get into the economics of it, there are economic outcomes that result in renting being a more financially efficient option than owning a home.
With so many potential occupants, they don't need to keep rental costs low. Even renting now comes with a list of add-on fees that most Gen Z just don't take into account, leading to people sharing homes in an attempt to afford them but still not making ends meet. And it's hardly a surprise. I mean, the average rent in places like New York alone is $4,000 a month. And that's without the bills and water costs.
I remember, I think Rich was telling me back whenever, like 4 years ago, he told me that like his rent at his apartment in New York City was like $15K or something like that. Like it's insane. I wonder how much it is now.
meaning that a salary of $100,000 in some cases isn't even enough to be sustainable.
No, it's not.
It's a harsh new reality for many people in high cost of living cities in the US.
Because growing up, like making six figures, like that was the benchmark, right?
And for the most part, Generation Z are feeling the brunt of this, starting at the bottom of the ladder with the most debt and the least amount of possibility to get paid so much. And with inflation on top of this, it almost feels like to be in Gen Z and build any real wealth, it's just a never-ending battle not to go into debt. We have 86% less power compared to baby boomers. To pay for basic needs like groceries, gas, and utility bills, most have to choose often between saving more or discretionary spending. Economic policies may show that the economy is improving.
So this number goes up because all of the rich people, like all of these gains, you think the bottom 20% of the population was part of this line? This is Elon. Look at Elon and Zuckerberg's net worth. Yeah, exactly. The rich got richer. And you can see, by the way, look at where things really started going crazy. It's after the recession recovery. How did all this money go up during COVID while everybody else's standard of living went down? COVID depressed everybody's standard of living. Meanwhile, this line is going up like crazy.
Things like quantitative easing, GDP growth is mostly enjoyed by the older generations with wealth that's invested in the stock market or real estate.
This is the problem, right? Is that if you have money, it's so easy to make money. If you have like a lot of money invested, you just snowball. Just keep making more and more and more and more money. Have a lot of money invested. And so like a lot of services that people would have to pay for, I don't have to pay for. And other things like all bank fees and like bank stuff, I don't have to pay for any of that. And so a big issue is that it's expensive to be poor and it's cheap to be rich.
With wages massively stagnating, along with huge student debt, it's no surprise that debt levels are rising at an unprecedented rate compared to previous generations. Between 2021 and 2023, Gen Z individuals aged 18 to 26 experienced a staggering 179% increase in their overall debt burden. This is the largest surge among all generation cohorts during that period. A substantial portion of debt is attributed to student loans. In comparison, older millennials and those of the same age in 2006 had a lower incidence of student debt, indicating that Generation Z might be shouldering a heavier financial burden earlier in their life. When people say generation are just more lazy than other previous generations, there's a lot more to this than it first seems. It's not laziness to have a coffee and an iPhone, or to not care about your job if you can't even afford to survive. This isn't to do with laziness and apathy, but more so the fact that there's no reason to care anymore. It's why employee confidence, morale, and birth rates are declining across the globe. And as this happens, so too are the fertility rates dropping. The US recently reached a historic low of 1.62 births per woman, far below the 2.1 needed to sustain a stable population. And the same sort of boring soulless corporate work no longer connects with Generation Z, especially when they can't even afford to live properly. And how can society expect Generation Z to be having large, happy families when the cost of raising a child is approximately $300,000 by age 17? And that's excluding college and inflation. High student debt, stagnant wages, and unaffordable housing all compounds to this challenge, not only discouraging job satisfaction but also having a family. It's why only back in 2003, 83% of people expressed a desire to become parents. But today, that number has now dropped down to 51%. This isn't just about Generation Z being lazy or whatever that means. The economic impact of all of this is going to be significant. Fewer young people entering the workforce exacerbates labor shortages, already visible in aging societies like Japan, where nearly 30% of the population is over 65. This imbalance increases financial pressures on workers, inflates taxes, and reduces benefits, further destabilizing economies. Efforts to reverse these declines, including family incentives and generous parental leave policies in nations like
the reason why you can't pay people to have more kids is they think that giving somebody $1,000 to have a kid is going to offset the $300,000 cost. You also have the opportunity cost. So a lot of times it's harder to advance in your career if you have kids. And this is especially true, I bet, if you're a woman.
France, Japan, and Taiwan have seen limited success. Cultural and systemic barriers persist, emphasizing that financial support alone can't resolve these issues. It's hard enough without even having kids, which is a terrible tragedy. To support a home for a family, with our current home-to-income ratio being around 6 to 8 years, sometimes even 14 in other Western countries. But for baby boomers back in 1988, this ratio was only 4 years. The situation is spiraling out of control. So then how will this affect our future? Could this really be the start of a population collapse? Well, you see,
it is, and it's inevitable.
Here's what the US looked like in 2023. Instead of a large population of kids waiting to replace the adults as they get older, the opposite is now true. Aging populations and population decline present a massive problem for societies. It's now predicted that over 20 developed nations will see their populations halve before 2100. Sure, our grandchildren or even our great-grandchildren can enjoy the benefits, but for us, we're going to have to deal with the immediate fallout of demographic collapse. Corporations and governments will push for Korean-style working conditions and hours if they think they can get away with it. 18-hour workdays all day every week. Now, every generation has undoubtedly gone through hardships far worse than what we see today. Men being conscripted to fight in the trenches for years, never-ending wars, never moving anywhere. Plagues, rations, Great Depressions, war would make any one of the past
they would get rid of the poor, dumb people back in the day.
Offer any of our struggles today. But no issue recently has been so existential to the progression of humanity as this.
Too extreme.
That's why no matter what, you'll see those in the top of governments and corporations frantically worrying about the coming population collapse. Yet to truly address this, we have to look at the root causes, most of which is coming from these exact issues, making Generation Z that much poorer today relative to any other time in modern history.
Yeah, it's just going to keep getting worse. Anyway, yeah, I think this is a good video. I also think that there's a lot of Gen Z people that make a lot of money too. And I think that also it's again about that disparity. Like if you're smart with the internet and you're good at kind of like figuring out systems and, you know, doing shit like that, you can absolutely make a lot of money.